Hello and welcome to my course on postcolonialism. I'm Masood Raja, and in this brief lecture I'll be talking about Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden. Now the reason I start my courses with this poem is because it's deeply important to read this poem carefully and understand the imperial consciousness and imperial mentality or colonial consciousness. And of course the phrase the white man's burden is used repeatedly in all these neo-colonial ventures and everything else. So before I discuss this with my students in my classes, we already build up a basic understanding of postcolonial studies, an introduction to the history of scramble for Africa, colonization of India and the Caribbean. So this kind of then becomes an example of the mentality of a colonial poet. Now Kipling was pretty interesting. Most of his life he grew up in India. Most of his work is set in India. His characters are Indian. Who hasn't heard of Mowgli the Frog, right? Or Kim from his novel Kim. And he also had a deep affinity for India. But when he returns to England and in his politics, he was an imperialist. He wanted India to be part of the British Empire, and that's the faction that he joins, and that's in Britain, and those are his views. So it's kind of that ambiguous situation of European Orientalists and others who love the romantic aspects of India and its history, but couldn't bring themselves to love the natives themselves. That kind of quandary that Kipling also represents. Now this poem, The White Man's Burden, and I'm just roughly reading an introduction from an online source, was published in 1899. And I'm just going to read and quote. In February 1899, British novelist and poet Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem entitled The White Man's Burden. The United States and the Philippine Islands. In this poem, Kipling urged the U.S. to take up the burden of empire. So this is happening when 1899, that's when United States has launched its offensive in Philippines. And Kipling, having realized that the British power is sort of waning, encourages America to take its role of bringing the so-called civilization to the masses. And the president, the vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, who eventually becomes president, actually sends this poem to one of the senators, and he says, and I quote, "It was rather poor poetry, but good sense from the expansion point of view." So if you had any doubt that poems and novels and stories can launch empires, here is a poem that gives you that example. Now, here is how I discuss this poem. Right now, you can go into the structuralist aspects of it, formalist aspects of it, but remember, the main refrain in the poem, the line that keeps repeated, is "Take up the white man's burden." That's where the poem starts. So if we read it stanza by stanza, here is the first beginning. "Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best you breed. Go send your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child." Now this is fully loaded with a kind of imperial view of the world, right? So the line is, "Take up the white man's burden," right? Like it's offered as a job without any motive, altruistic almost, right? That go take up your job to do what? First of all, send the best you breed. So send your best people out in the world, right? To live in exile, right? And what to do? To serve your captives' needs. So not live for themselves in exile, but to serve the lives of those that you have colonized. And who are those? They are childlike. They are sullen people, right? Half devil and half child, right? So what kind of a juxtaposition is being made that the Europeans, the white men, right, who have found these colonized people, they are altruistic, they are noble, they have a mission to bring light and civilization to who? To these people who are wild, who are almost childlike or devilish, right? That's the juxtaposition that is being set up here in this poem. Now keep that in mind, that this way of looking at the world is still how most North Atlantic regions justify their intrusions into the rest of the world, that we are there to bring civilization, to bring light, to bring development, right? The natives of all these countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, countries in Africa, right, Senegal, elsewhere, they're assumed to be unmanageable. They are assumed to be unintelligent and maybe ossified in a past time, right? Going on to the next stanza, take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride by open speech and simple and 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Okay. Again, there is an accentuation of the mission itself. What is the mission, right? You do all these things, right? To not be too proud and not be too violent, but to seek another's profit and work another's gain. That this entire project of colonization is for the betterment of others, your captives, the sullen people. The entire project is for these white men, for these Europeans, is that we are doing a favor to you, and we are doing it at the cost of our own interest. And think of it this way, that's how the colonizers justified themselves, right? Look at Indian history. I mean, how do the British justify themselves? We brought you schools, we brought you the railway, we brought you, universities, civilization, right? These are and the idea, the way it is presented, it as if it was done altruistically for India's own good. I mean, we all know that railway was built to extract Indian resources, right? Take them to the mother country. But no, this is the message that Kipling is repeating, right? As if colonizing is a noble mission, right? And that's why I start with this poem, because I think it speaks to even the vocabularies that are used today. So I'll keep reading. I'll go to the next stanza here. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. So now he's going to tell us that it's a selfless task. You're bringing civilization and profit for these people, not for yourself, but beware. This is how these people will reward you, right? And reap his old reward, the blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard, the cry of hosts you humor, slowly to the light. Why brought you us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Okay, that last two lines, of course, why brought you out of bondage, are a reference to Moses, right? Here is Moses leading his people from slavery to freedom into the desert. And at a certain point, after they are wandering in the desert, people basically turn on Moses and ask him, why we had homes, we had a place to sleep. Why did you bring us out of there into this desert? And what he's equating the colonial experience is with that here you are. You're going to try to better these people's life, but eventually they will turn on you. So also keep in mind there is a binary structure at work, right? The noble Europeans have brought altruistically all this development and help to these sullen people. The people he is invoking, who he thinks will reward with, abuses and everything to the colonizers, they are essentialized. They have essentialized qualities that he's invoking. There is no reference here to mutability, that these people might change. They are essentially childlike. They are essentially half devils, and they will essentially turn against you. And it constantly then, as you read these lines, the white man's mission is offered as more and more noble and altruistic, which is up against these ungrateful people that they are trying to help. Right? I'll go to the next line. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy, ungrudged praise, comes now to search your manhood through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Right? I think this particular part of... So, at the end is that what he's offering is that after you've done it all, after these people turn on you, your venture will eventually fail because you will have to leave. And that is what makes it into a noble project, right? Probably, I think the online poem that I was reading, it skipped certain passages, but overall, here is the message that comes across. What is the white man's burden? It's represented as an altruistic mission, a civilizing mission to go and help these people who maybe can't help themselves, but that help is totally geared towards that. And these colonizers are doing it at the cost of their own health, at the cost of their own profit. It's not a profitable venture. It's a noble cause, right? And there is an understanding that the people that these people are supposedly helping are going to turn on them, but there are no existential or material causes given for them. That is essentialized as if these people are naturally ungrateful. Now think of it. You have watched some lectures on postcolonial theory. How does postcolonial theory come into this poem? Now, if we didn't have postcolonial studies or postcolonial theoretical ways of reading these texts from the point of view of the natives, this highly canonized poem could very easily be taught and read as, the white man's mission as being a noble mission. There are so many people in the world, in America, in United States, Canada, Australia, elsewhere, who actually think that what they do is a thankless job and they are constantly helping these people in Africa and Asia, India, Pakistan, right? That's the colonizer mentality. And when those people start asking questions, they feel offended, as if when you go and help someone, they surrender their right to ask questions. But we all know that the imperial project, the colonizing project, was never about bringing light and civilization to these people. Those were the ideologies that were used to normalize, right, the actual act of colonization. Right? These were all capitalistic ventures, military ventures. Here, Kipling, I'm pretty sure he knows the truth, but he's trying to offer a romanticized view of the mission of the white man's burden and the white man's mission, and then sending it to Americans right at the cusp when they're about to colonize Philippines, right? And that teaches us something about not just the material and ideological basis of colonialism, but how do poets and writers produce materials that help build the edifice of an imperial system. So I hope this was helpful. This is the first lecture that I start with, or first discussion of a literary text, and I've already given you my reasons. And most importantly, the reason is to pick up a poem which was produced during the contact phase by an imperial poet and see how does that poem offer a representations of Europeans, right, or their mission. And then how can we point out the dichotomies and the essentializing of the natives. And historically, that colonialism wasn't all that about just being altruistic and noble. So that's all I have. Thank you so much, and I'll be back with another lecture on another primary text or a secondary text with my thoughts on it. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to send them my way, and I'll be happy to address them. And or any other suggestions. Thank you so much, and until the next time, peace and love.